Welcome to Community Spotlight on Rainier Avenue Radio World. My guest tonight is outspoken and tireless advocate for affirmative action, Dr. Jesse Wineberry, former state representative in our state legislature, a graduate of law school, a product of Seattle Public Schools, graduating from Queen Anne High School. We also played football there, but he also played football when I coached at CAY. Grew up in the Central area. One of our own, as they say, but has been tirelessly working to repeal I-200, and we are now at the cusp of the executive order being written in by Governor Jay Inslee regarding affirmative action and I-200. And well, I'll let Dr. Wineberry present the information to you, ladies and gentlemen. So hopefully he can get connected, and he will be meeting us shortly on this Zoom meeting. So in the meantime, while we wait, we will, well, again, I-200 came into effect and was voted in mistakenly, I think, in many cases by the individuals who thought, who thought they might understand what affirmative action and the opponents of it were designed to do away with affirmative action and what we call remediating past discrimination. And so in that vein, much of what we know about the activities of the individuals has been, to dismantle affirmative action and to, again, promote their I guess, viewpoint of history. And so, one of the things that we know, there has been systemic discrimination. There has been a number of iterations about it over the last few years. And so, one of the things that we know that's important is that without a remedial effort to deal with systemic discrimination, we have nothing as a society. Individuals, because of their race, color, national origin, etc., are not getting the benefit of opportunities for employment, opportunities for business, for education. So all of these things, we know affirmative action is one of those tools that we use to address the present effects of past discrimination. And at least that's how I've always viewed it and I present it. And so these are the kinds of discussions that we have to have. But now we have, again, basically repealing I-200 through an executive order through Governor Jay Inslee, something that's been on the books since 1998, where the significant portion, the majority of the contracts dollars from 1998 to present have gone to non-minority firms, the majority of them. So it's pretty obvious what we can accomplish utilizing programs like minority women business programs, affirmative action, with respect to talking about enrollment in state community colleges and universities and how we can up the numbers. We can also look at how public employment would be affected through I-200 being rescinded because of the fact that, there are opportunities at public level, public employment, the government, local government, state government, where affirmative action would have an impact on bringing people who are underrepresented and underutilized into the workforce. And that's the concept of affirmative action, to identify areas of concentration or overutilization, as well as places, and most importantly, where there's underutilization and underrepresentation. And we're talking about people who are qualified, who meet the qualification standard, the minimum qualification standard. This is nothing that's even akin to preference. This is nothing akin to hiring people who are not capable, who are not qualified. And so those opponents of affirmative action always use that as their mantra. And so again, we have a great opportunity. I have invited Dr. Jesse Wineberry, an attorney, but also former state legislative representative, to come and talk about. And he has, I can't tell you how much energy and how much time and commitment he has given to this effort to, I guess you could say, blunt the effects and literally rescind I-200 and all the damage it's done over the last 20 plus years. So anyways, come on in, Jesse. If you could unmute your microphone and we're ready to go. Hey, how are you?
Hello.
You look good.
Can you hear me?
Oh yeah, we hear you fine. Hey, thank you very much. At last minute, I wanted to get this and the community spotlight. And again, ladies and gentlemen, listen to this community spotlight on Rainier Avenue Radio World. We are on the cusp of, well, we've got ML King holiday on Monday, but we also have something that's really significant and impactful for the state of Washington. And so I have invited Dr. Jesse Wineberry to come and talk about what we've been talking about and I said the effective I-200 and what it has done and rescinding of it through Governor Jay Inslee's executive order. So I'm just going to turn it over to you. And I'm going to tell you, he has spent a significant portion of the last few years and several years combating the effects of I-200. And he is going to share some very interesting facts with us. So thank you very much, Dr. Wineberry.
Well, John, it's good to be with you. This is a historic moment that we're coming up on, and I just appreciate the time that you spent throughout your career fighting against discrimination, being the architect of a number of laws on the federal level as well as on the state level to protect our community from discrimination and to keep those doors of opportunity open for the people who want to achieve their dreams, whether it be getting a college education, getting a good job, or even starting their own business and creating hundreds of jobs, if not thousands of jobs, through government contracting. So I really thank you for your commitment as well.
Well, thank you. I mean, I'm one of several. You've dedicated a significant portion of your career to doing it too as well. And when you were in the legislature, one of the youngest members of the legislature, when you ran and won that seat representing the central area. But as we know, I-200, and it was a sham because of how it was presented to the public. When they signed a petition, all of that stuff, we know what they say. Are you for civil rights? And yeah, the majority of people said, yeah. Because I know I got approached and I said, no, hold it. Let me read what you have. And that was how they approached it. We know who the players were that crafted that. So anyways, then they got passed 1998. And then I guess, like I said, before bringing you on, it has had a significant impact on public college and university enrollment for people of color, for employment opportunities, and for public agencies. And then also, for what it's done to, contracting opportunities. 90+% of the state's contract dollars have gone to non-minority and women-owned firms, primarily minority firms, people of color. Anyways, please.
Well, one of the things that is somewhat new information to the world, and that is I-200 did not kill affirmative action. For years, people like yourself and myself and many, many others who have been involved in what I call the civil rights movement, not just the civil rights movement, but the civil rights movement for economic development,
Right.
for wealth building, for owning, as well as producing in this economy. That we thought that in 1998, John Carlson, Tim Eyman, and those right-wing conservative forces put I-200 on the ballot, and that it was to kill affirmative action. But what we have learned this year is that I-200 specifically said it is not, the purpose was not to kill all affirmative action programs. The only thing they wanted to do, and this is stated in the voters pamphlet and stated in the I-200 language, was to take a lesser qualified person and prohibit them from being selected for a job, a seat in college, or a contract over a more qualified person based on race and gender. And that has never been affirmative action. No. Ever since Art Fletcher, the father of affirmative action, who started his career in Washington State. He was on the Pasco City Council. He ran for lieutenant governor and almost won. An African-American pioneer. He is the father of affirmative action because after he ran for lieutenant governor as a Republican and almost won, a Republican president, Richard Nixon, appointed him to be undersecretary of the Department of Labor. And that's where he wrote the federal laws on affirmative action. And so that's where it started. And the key thing about affirmative action is that first and foremost, no matter who you were, no matter whether you were black, brown, red, yellow, male or female, you had to be qualified.
Exactly.
You had to be qualified. If you were trying to get into a university, you had to have the grades. You had to have the test scores in order to be admitted. And some people will say, well, then back in the day, what happened to the people who may have not had the grades and the test scores? I'll tell you what they did. They didn't admit them. They would work with them in remedial programs, and they would say to somebody who was trying to get into the University of Washington, and maybe the first time they tried, they didn't get in, they would send them to community colleges. And to give them a chance to lift their grades, to improve their test taking skills. And then they try again with a higher GPA, a higher standardized test score, and then they would get admitted. And so affirmative action has never been a program that just gave away jobs or gave away seats in college or gave away contracts to people who were lesser qualified. So when I-200 passed on that basis, it didn't kill affirmative action. What killed affirmative action, unfortunately, is something called Governor's Directive 9801. And in November 3rd, 1998, I-200 passed on the ballot by 58% of the vote. 58% of the voters voted to pass I-200. And 30 days later, on December 3rd, 1998, Governor Gary Locke, who was governor at that time, issued a directive to all state agencies that ultimately was adopted by all cities, all counties, all school districts, all port commissions, all colleges, all universities. Every kind of public government agency adopted Governor's Directive 9801, and that document specifically said you cannot use race and gender affirmative action in hiring, in contracting, or college admissions. And a lot of people didn't even know it existed because it wasn't a governor's order. It wasn't an executive order. It was a governor's directive. An executive order is required to be public. A governor has to proclaim it, and has to have press there, the media. It goes and it has
out. Doesn't it have force of law, almost the same thing?
Yes, and it has a force of law. And a governor's directive, on the other hand, is more like a memorandum from a CEO, except the governor is a CEO. It doesn't go into the public. It goes to the governor's cabinet members. You're right, the secretaries of agencies, the directors, the managers, but that makes it more potent because nobody knows it's there. And we didn't know when you and I and nearly 400,000 others signed off on I-1000 in 2018 and 2019. We didn't know about Governor's Directive 9801. And so once we learned about it this year, that's when we identified the real source of what ended affirmative action in Washington State.
Mm-hmm. That is incredible. And so all these years we've been laboring under the misconception that affirmative action was dead, and it wasn't.
It wasn't.
And it is a fact. An executive order has more weight than a directive. A directive is a suggestion that has some, I guess you could say some authority behind it, but an executive order, like I said, the way I understand it, has effective law, just like a regulation has effective law. Same thing. It's really interesting because at the time I worked for the Human Rights Commission and I drafted the last iteration of affirmative action. It was a formal regulation under the Washington Administrative Code. And then at that time, George Fleming, the late great George Fleming, took it, ran with it, and made it a state law that state agencies had to have an approved affirmative action program.
Exactly. And that was in 1985. I know because I was elected in 84. 1985 was my freshman year in the legislature. Right. And I'll never forget sitting on the floor of the House of Representatives. And back then they had pages that would bring notes to you, young people who were in high school or college that would work down at Olympia. And so a note was brought to me on the floor, and it came from George Fleming and Jim McDermott, who were both senators at the time. Right. And everybody thought that I was in the same district with George Fleming because he was Black and I was Black, and we were both from Seattle. But the reality, as you know, I was elected in the 43rd district. Yeah. He was in the 37th. So Jim McDermott was my senator. And they came over and they showed me this bill that had just passed the Senate. And they said, listen, we need you to get this through the House. We need you to schedule it for a hearing, make sure it gets to the right committee. I had never done anything like that before. I just got there to Olympia. But I was blessed to be in the right position in history to take what was then Senate Bill 3346, and that was the first statutory law creating affirmative action. Now, before that, there had been governor's executive orders, right? A series of them that had created and kept affirmative action going. But it was Senator Fleming's bill that first put affirmative action into law, in permanent law in Washington State. And the good news about that, is good that you bring that up, because I-200 never struck that law. And if it was really intending to kill affirmative action, that would have been the first victim of the law. It would have said, we hereby strike what is now RCW 49.74 from being in statutory law. It never did. So Senator Fleming's law survived I-200 and has been in place since 1985. It's now 2022. It is still in place. And that's another reason why, and we'll get into the story later, why the Supreme Court ruled that I-200 did not kill affirmative action.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Again, in this day and age, with all that's going on, we still talk about the fact that we're coming out of a pandemic, or going, well, hopefully it'll be an endemic soon, but this pandemic has had just a deleterious effect on the economy. But if the economy goes sideways, just add it in there, what it does to, businesses run by people of color. Think about that.
Well, Governor Inslee's budget right now, if you were to Google Governor Jay Inslee supplemental budget, it says statistically exactly what you have described, except it's much worse. John, right now, based on a survey done that is published in Governor Inslee's budget, nearly half of the Black community in Washington State is not just unemployed, they're living in poverty. Nearly half of the Latinx community in Washington State is living in poverty. And nearly half of the Native American or indigenous community are living in poverty. And a big reason why is because over the last 23 years, the jobs that they were supposed to have, the contracting opportunities and business opportunities to create jobs that they were supposed to have, they've been denied because of the state's position that we don't have affirmative action here in Washington State. So we don't have to hire you. We don't have to admit you into colleges and universities. We don't have to award you contracts. We have been under the impression that Washington has been one of 9 states in America. Only 9 states have ever banned affirmative action. And so we're in the company of states like Florida, Idaho, Texas, New Hampshire, Oklahoma, Michigan, Arizona, Nebraska. Most of those states are red states. And we have been put on that list, which many people consider the greatest national racist and sexist state list, because when the world, or when the rest of the 41 states and the federal government that have affirmative action see that a state has killed affirmative action, that state is sending a message nationally and globally that they don't want people of color, that they don't want women having an opportunity to achieve their dreams in terms of just having a good job, opportunity for business, and an opportunity to earn a degree in college.
Well, the whole premise of affirmative action is to deal and to blunt the present effects of past discrimination. When you look at workforces, the Supreme Court said many years ago, wouldn't most workforces reflect the population? If you look at the population of the United States and you look at who's employed, you see that there are disparities. Underutilization occurs all the way across the board. And that is one of the areas that affirmative action addresses. You do a study, you assess, and you say, hold it, we have underutilization in positions where we should have a significant number of individuals that should be employed there, people of color. Because if you look at the population in the work skills and the, what they call labor force, workforce analysis, they're there, but they're not getting hired. And the same way with promotion. And John Carlson and I argued about this, and he said, it's reverse discrimination. I said, John, but aren't most, okay, it's like this. Explain to me how, if men are only 48% of the population, that there's one group of white males that constitute about 90% of the heads of the major corporations in the country. 90% of the population ain't white males. So how does that happen? That's concentration. In other words, a group of people who, if you looked in the population, it's less than what you see in that workforce. So I don't want to get out. I don't want to cut you off, but like I said, those are the things you look at when you look at affirmative action and how it's applied. Underutilization and concentration, but it is never predicated on preference based on someone not qualified being hired. That is not affirmative action. And that,
you hit a bullseye, and you mentioned John Carlson, and so I want to give him credit where it's due. John Carlson and I, without any intention to connect with each other, ended up having coffee over in Bellevue, and I asked him a question, because it was my first time in a long time speaking with him face to face. And I've known John for at least 30 years. And I said, what was it in your life that happened to you that made you such a devout racist? And he he went through the roof. I mean, his eyes got wide. He says, how can you call me a racist? I said, what do you mean? you're the one that led I-200, and it was after we had in I-1000 had lost by 1 point. I said, you're the one who led referendum 88 behind the scenes. And he said, yeah, but what you have to remember is that I'm also the one who wrote the voters pamphlet statement for I-200. And we said we did not want to kill all affirmative action programs. Well, at the time, I had never seen the voters pamphlet in my life. And so I didn't believe him. And because it was back in 1998, it was tough to find. And so a number of us we had to go to Olympia to meet with the Secretary of State's office anyway. And so they sent us over to the Pritchard building, where we ended up pulling up the 1998 voters pamphlet off of microfiche. Now, a lot of your younger listeners don't even know what microfiche is, right? But we they think it's something that you little small fish you go fishing for in Lake Washington. Right. But it's basically where you see the pictures of a document, and then you're able to shoot a snapshot of them,
make a copy
under
of it,
a microscope, and then you take it to the desk of the library, and then they copy it off for you. Right. So we had one copied off, and when I saw that they put in bold letters in the voters pamphlet exactly what he said, that we are not here to kill affirmative action program, we just want to stop less qualified from being put in jobs and colleges and contracts over more qualified people based on race. That's when I knew, okay, so it wasn't I-200. So then if I-200 didn't kill affirmative action and affirmative action is dead in Washington State, then who killed it? And that's when we were directed to Governor's Directive 9801. And when we read that, we knew we had gotten there. And I'll tell you something, and you know this, we decided after we found that document that we were going to sue Washington State because this was a directive, as you pointed out, nobody voted on. The legislature didn't enact it. It wasn't an executive order done publicly. And we knew it was in violation of I-200. So we were going to do a lawsuit, and it was during the discovery and research for the lawsuit that we discovered the holy grail case, which was parents involved in community schools versus Seattle School District. A case way back in 2003 that was ruled on by the Washington State Supreme Court, the highest court in the land. And it basically took I-200 and analyzed it and ruled that I-200 did not kill affirmative action, and that affirmative action, race-conscious affirmative action, was permissible in Washington State. And that was after Governor Locke's directive. And we knew as lawyers that the highest level of law that can be handed down in a state is the Supreme Court. So next we look to see, okay, was it appealed? Was it overturned? Was it overruled? No, it was never even challenged. And that's when we did the research to find out that that law, combined with Senator Fleming's statutory law, was the official, final, and conclusive law on affirmative action in Washington State, which meant affirmative action was not only alive and well for women and people of color in 2022 when we discovered it, but it has been alive and well for women and people of color for the last 24 years.
I know, and I think Gary got bad advice from his AG on that one. I know he did, but we're going to wrap this up because we're going to come back for part 2. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to do Community Spotlight, a second version when Governor Inslee signs the executive order, which he's intending to do, which we know he's going to do. I think he may stage it during ML King Day. Who knows? Close to it. But be looking for us again. My guest, Jesse Wineberry, Dr. Jesse Wineberry, Seattle's own, and me, John Yasutake, here on Seattle, not Seattle here now, but Community Spotlight. We'll be back on the next iteration, part 2, on Community Spotlight with respect to where we go from here, I guess you could say, after Governor Inslee's executive order. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much.